This week on The Anxious Truth, we're answering common questions about anxiety and anxiety disorders sent in by you guys, the audience. Today, we're going to talk about emetophobia. We're going to talk about nocturnal panic attacks and exposures related to that. We're going to talk about how concentrating on breathing when you're anxious could be a distraction, or maybe it isn't. We're going to talk about ruminating about ruminating. We're going to talk about external sources of anxiety and how you might deal with those. We're going to talk about the fear of becoming suicidal against your will, which is really common in our community. And then I'm going to have a few words about some specific thoughts or symptoms that people always want to ask about. So thank you for the feedback from the audience. Let's get into it. This is an absolutely no production, no frills episode of The Anxious Truth. In fact, if you're on the YouTube channel, you have a still image today. There's no video. It's just me. I'm the only one that records and produces The Anxious Truth. I don't have a production team that follows me around. Sometimes my schedule is just a little too much and I cannot fit in recording and editing video. So today it's me sitting outside in the sun, actually, recording into my phone with one of my other microphones because it's the first 60-degree day we have on Long Island without 40-mile-an-hour wind, and I'm trying to take advantage. So no intro, no music, a little bit no frills, and we're going to get into questions from the audience. Who is the one-man show behind The Anxious Truth? That would be me. I'm Drew Linsalata. I am the creator and host of this podcast. I am a therapist, pre-licensed, still practicing under supervision in the state of New York. I specialize in the treatment of anxiety and anxiety disorders. I also suffered from various forms of anxiety disorder, OCD, and depression for many years of my life, on and off. Better now. 3-time author on this topic, an educator and advocate, social media guy, and clearly a podcast host. Not just this podcast, but also Disordered, that I do with my friend Josh Fletcher in the UK. You could find that one at disordered.fm if you want more resources. And on The Anxious Truth, we talk about anxiety disorders, and the process of recovery from those particular issues. So if you've just stumbled upon the podcast or the YouTube channel today for the first time, welcome. Glad you're here. Hope you find it helpful. And of course, if you're a returning listener or viewer, welcome back. Thanks for spending some time with me this week. So this week, we're going to take questions from the audience, some common questions that people asked. Many of these questions were repeated. And if you want to send in a question, if you're listening to this as a podcast episode, you'll notice that in the podcast description, there's always a link that says send in a question or comment via text. Feel free to use it. You can send me a text. I will see it. I will not see your name. I will not see your number. I cannot text you back. I cannot share it. You will not get spammed. It's totally safe. It's just a way for you to communicate comments and questions to me by just clicking a link. So if you have questions or comments for me, feel free to use that link and send them in. Today, we're going to cover 5 or 6 questions and then a sort of a general issue that gets repeated again and again. So let's get started with emetophobia. What is emetophobia? Emetophobia is the fear of vomiting. Now, nobody wants to vomit, but people who have emetophobia will go to great lengths to prevent that from happening, are always on the lookout for signs that it might happen, and it becomes highly, highly, highly impactful. And it's actually something that we see quite common alongside things like panic disorder and agoraphobia. When emetophobia is in the mix, it definitely adds a wrinkle, because anybody who's trying to learn how to face their anxiety, or face or allow or tolerate or accept, who is very fearful that if they get too anxious, they might vomit because they have a phobia of that, this makes that approach really difficult. So when there's emetophobia in the mix, we always have to address that. And one listener sent in a question about emetophobia and trying to help her 16-year-old daughter. This person actually said, do you think my book would be appropriate for her at her age, or do you think it's more geared toward adults? While I have written 3 books on the topic of anxiety and anxiety recovery, I'm not sure that I would recommend any of them for an emetophobic, and I'll tell you why. First of all, if you're dealing with a teenager that is emetophobic, the rules for treatment generally are the same. A therapist would approach that the same way. When you're dealing with an adolescent, a teen, or a child, we're just looking at understanding that sometimes that person isn't going to process the same way that an adult does, because they're still kind of growing up and they're still sort of building their brain functions, which is normal. So we would just have to be cognizant of what the person is able to grasp and not grasp, and how they might process differently than a fully grown and mature adult. But otherwise, the process of treating emetophobia would be the same. The difficult thing about emetophobia, and why I say that while the book that I wrote called The Anxious Truth talks about the principles that would be applied in emetophobia treatment. People who have emetophobia tend to want specificity. They will not be able to generalize from, oh, this is how you deal with panic attacks, or this is how you deal with intrusive thoughts, or this is how you deal with agoraphobia. I can apply those rules to my emetophobia. They won't get that because they truly will carve out space and say, no, but vomiting is in fact the worst possible outcome that any sentient being could face on planet Earth, and they will stick to those guns. So that's why I don't think any of my books would really be terribly helpful. You really want specificity there. But if you're dealing with emetophobia, the bad news is the most empirically validated treatment is through exposure. But I need to be clear about that because this is something we're probably going to talk about on Disordered. But no part of exposure for emetophobia would involve a therapist intentionally telling you that you have to vomit. Now, this gets a little bit strange because each individual emetophobe, each individual client who's dealing with emetophobia may actually wind up taking it that far, but that's up to them. They get to decide that. Official exposure treatment for emetophobia does not include the client must vomit. It cannot be that way. That would not be ethical in any way, shape, or form. And an emetophobe, just like any other therapy client, has full autonomy at all time and gets to decide their limits. So, while yes, this is about challenging the belief that, vomiting is an unacceptable, dangerous experience that will break somebody, and learning that through exposure, usually to things like words or stories or images or sounds. You guys all know there's a ton of animated, depictions of vomiting. There's a ton of vomit scenes in movies and TV shows. There are song lyrics. There are passages in books. We can use those sort of things as exposure. And at some point, some people do choose to take it so far that okay, I got myself a stomach virus and I'm going to let this happen because you can't stop it anyway. That's not the therapist's choice. So it's really important. While you do have to learn to face that fear and use exposure-based therapies for emetophobia, none of that would involve a therapist saying you have to go vomit, ever. So just please keep that in mind. Good question. I appreciate you wanting to support your daughter in this challenge. Emetophobia is really difficult. It's really stubborn. I do work with quite a number of emetophobes in my practice. Oddly, I'm the vomit guy in the practice. Who saw that coming? But they're also great people, and they really do want to get better. So that's a little bit on emetophobia. We're going to do an emetophobia episode on Disordered. Again, that's at disordered.fm. I have done emetophobia episodes on The Anxious Truth in the past. If you go to theanxioustruth.com and just search for the word, you'll find those all. A couple of success stories that might be helpful. So the next question was sent in about nocturnal panic attacks and specifically exposures for that, which is a really common question because nocturnal panic attacks are really difficult. A nocturnal panic attack is a panic attack that just blows you out of a dead sleep. There's no specific trigger. How can I be anxious? I was sleeping. I don't know why they happen. It's certainly jarring because you're in a dead sleep and next thing you know, you're wide awake and you're in full-blown panic. It is not easy at all. But the question this person sent in was, my panic attacks happen during my sleep. I wake up usually after a first sleep cycle, already in a heightened anxious state. Most times lately, I'm able to relax and attempt to accept. Good job. It means you've been practicing. I was wondering if we ever talked about this presentation of panic before. Yes, we did a nocturnal panic attacks episode on Disordered, if you want to check out that podcast. This person says, it's so disorienting waking up from sleep into an attack, especially when there's no obvious precipitating trigger. That is true. It's hard to ground yourself mindfully when you're in a half-sleep state. True. You're in a half-sleep state and everything's a little bit unusual in that moment. That is also true. I'm wondering if this is something that you or other listeners experience. Yes, I did myself when I was struggling with panic disorder and agoraphobia. Many, many, many other listeners of this podcast and in the anxiety disorder community do, in fact, experience regular nocturnal panic attacks for sure. And this person says, are there any particular guidance for this scenario and how to do exposure when you can't control them when they happen? That's an excellent question. So the bad news about nocturnal panic attacks is that they're really not different. While they are certainly more disruptive and jarring and maybe more scary and shocking, right? There's a shock element, like I was dead asleep and now why am I gasping for air? My heart is pounding and I'm sweating. I was just sleeping. The principles are the same. And while when you're awakened into a state of extreme fear, it can be hard to remember what those principles are, ultimately we're going to fall back on them anyway. It may mean that it takes you're going to automatically fight against it and struggle it and try to control it because you're a little bit sleepy and you're not really processing the way you normally would while you were awake. But at some point, through practice, if you're practicing, you do start to understand like, oh, wait, I'm fighting this. And now you have to make that shift into like, I want to calm this down and use mindfulness and grounding to instantly calm it or make it go away. But I have to stop doing that. I have to just ride it out. So while I know everybody would hope that there's some sort of special thing you do for nocturnal panic attacks, and it's a reasonable question to ask, the answer is no, there's kind of not, other than to just acknowledge that it is definitely a more difficult experience to go through, which presents a different set of challenges, makes it a little bit more difficult to use an acceptance or tolerance principles or mindful principles to work through. And you have to be kind to yourself because of that extra challenge. But at the same time, you have to recognize that like, oh, I really do have to let that ride even at night when it's scary and jarring and I don't know why it happened and I'm just disoriented. We have to work through that. People who have nocturnal panic attacks that practice that and work through that do find that ultimately as a happy secondary effect, number one, they lose the fear of nocturnal panic attacks. They're not nearly as impactful as they once were. And then when that happens, the happy secondary effect is that they do begin to decrease or disappear completely. It's possible you will never have another nocturnal panic attack in your life, or it's possible that you might have them now and then, but they just won't be nearly as impactful. As for exposures about nocturnal panic attacks, there are none, right? So people seem to think that like, oh, I have to do exposures for everything. Well, remember that exposure is really part of exposure and response prevention. So an exposure is just the thing we do to trigger a situation where you want to engage in your safety or control or avoidance responses. So when you don't have to find a trigger because it just happened, you woke up and you're in a panic, congratulations, you're in an exposure environment already. And now you really just have to focus on the RP, which is the response prevention part. I want to get my ice packs. I want to, go out and stand in the grass and wiggle my toes. I want to tap on my cheek. I want to wake up my partner. I want to do all these things. But once I recognize those urges, I'm going to have to try to ride this out. I have to prevent those responses so that I learn that it's going to end anyway, even though it's really hard and scary and uncomfortable. That's what I have to do. So don't worry so much about exposures for nocturnal panic attacks. I mean, if I was working with you as a therapy client, we might, because we get to know each other and I get to know your specifics, we might find ways to work on exposures that are similar to nocturnal panic attacks. But in general, just know that when you're having one, you're in an exposure at that point, and now you care about the RP part more than anything else. You don't have to do exposures for everything. Sometimes life just puts you in them. And then you concentrate on the RP part, as difficult as that may be. Patience, please, and be nice to yourself because this is hard work, right? Say that all the time. So let's move on to the next question. This is a question about concentrating on breath. Like, is that a distraction? Is that wrong? So this person asks, do we not concentrate on our breath when we are feeling anxious to calm ourselves? Is that a distraction? I've been taking a few minutes, out during the day to check in and take a few belly breaths to calm my nervous system. I listen to all your podcasts all day long as I only just found it. Is that a source of distraction? I work all day on my own and live on my own, so in my head a lot, and that's why I put a podcast on. First of all, thank you for sending in the question. It is an excellent, excellent question because that whole focus on the breath thing can be very, very confusing. There's two things that we care about here. Focusing on your breath is never, in my theoretical orientation, a thing that we do to directly control our anxiety levels. We're not ever trying to operate directly on the anxiety itself because that becomes like chasing your tail. You wind up on a hamster wheel because you have to keep doing it. It doesn't really work consistently and you don't learn anything from that. But taking a few minutes throughout the day, as this person says they do, like every once in a while, take a breath, I take a few minutes, I stop and I take a few belly breaths. That's actually a really good strategy. But why are we doing that? We're really looking for concentrating on the breath as an alternative to fighting against the experience that I'm having. So when we use like breath focus and say a mindful meditation and acceptance or a mindful awareness type practice, we're only using the breath focus because it's a way to back away from the knee-jerk resistance and pushing against the experience that we don't like. In this case, I'm feeling really anxious. So I like the strategy of scheduling regular breaks. If I can determine that, oh, look at me struggling with my own internal state. I'm fighting it again. I'm resisting it. Let me stop and take 3 minutes to just focus on my breath. that's a good way to reset and back away from that resistance. I wouldn't look at it. I never look at it as, breathing is a way that you regulate or calm your nervous system. Now, I know this gets really confusing because in other types of therapies for other presentations like DBT, we would use, particularly measured breathing to try to help people emotionally regulate because they're not good at handling big emotions. That's true. But in this situation, and remember, this is a podcast, there's one of me and like 150,000 of you. I can't know the specifics, so I can only give you general principles here. Taking a few minutes out throughout the day when you notice that you're struggling against your anxiety and trying to control it, and that's amping you up even more. Let me stop, reset, take a few breaths, and stop fighting. That's a great use of concentrating on the breath. And honestly, that is primarily why I would use concentrate on the breath when anxious. But I think we got to practice that even when we're not anxious. So it is not a way to run away from the feelings. It's not a way to forcibly or manually turn the knobs and buttons on your nervous system. It's a way to back away from fighting my anxiety. Because remember, in our context, anxiety disorders, the biggest issue that we have is that we are anxious about being anxious. We're afraid because we're afraid. But we are afraid and we are anxious in that moment. So learning to let it play itself out is the better overall strategy. That's what we always talk about here. I know it's a big topic, but there's 300 other podcast episodes and a bunch of books about this that you can learn from. We're not using breath to get away from it or control it. We're using breath to give us a chance to see how we are fighting against it and trying to control a thing that we're never really able to control that well, and to get away from that control and to start to let it play itself out. So focus on the breath is is one technique we might use to foster mindful acceptance or willful tolerance or floating or whatever you want to call it. Hopefully that helps. It's not so much about directly trying to calm or control your nervous system. Is it a distraction? Yeah, it's a distraction, but there's always an element of distraction. What's your intent? I have to distract myself when I'm anxious or I won't be able to handle it. We don't want that. Does it distract you ultimately if you can focus on your breath? It sure does, but you can only be distracted if you're willing to take the chance on being distracted. So distraction, again, difficult, nuanced. We did an episode on distraction on Disordered, Josh and I did, where we talked about this, but no, I would not use it specifically to distract or control. So good question. Thank you so much. Next question. What do we have? We have a couple more questions to do, right? So let's do a question about ruminating. But this is a question about ruminating about ruminating. And if that's the most ruminating thing I've ever heard, right? Ruminating about ruminating. But if this is you and you're really focused, you're thinking about your thinking, I'm ruminating about my ruminating, it's not just you. Like a lot of people get trapped in this loop. So this person sends in, hey there, I have a question regarding exposures when you have some form of hyper-awareness issues. When I learned that rumination and keeping an eye on it, resistance or checking were the things that make me suffer. I then fear to do exactly those things. So I won't go into the entire rest of the question, but what this person is essentially describing is I'm hyper aware of what I'm thinking about. And now I heard that like ruminating is the thing that actually is making me worse, because in a ruminative presentation, and this is most prevalent in OCD and GAD, although everybody with an anxiety disorder will ruminate. Ruminate is just perseverative thinking, like constant thinking loops that you think are good ideas and then you think they're bad ideas because you're making you feel even worse. Why can't I turn my brain off? That's rumination. In this situation, we become so aware that like, oh wait, rumination is what I think is a good idea, but I actually have to learn to break the habit of rumination. But now I'm going to ruminate on whether or not I am ruminating, and I think I'm supposed to ruminate on ruminating. The hyper-awareness word in this question is the main thing. So a general principle here would be, if you are stuck in that sort of meta anxiety thing, like meta thinking, thinking about thinking, ruminating about ruminating, your task here is to say, I might not pay attention. What if I don't pay attention to what I'm thinking about? What if I let my brain think about whatever it wants and I acknowledge the process of thinking, which is going to go wherever it kind of wants if I leave it alone? That's allowed. This is really hard. I cannot give you specific steps on a podcast episode at all, but that would be a general principle. We might also look at, what if I substitute different activities? Instead of sitting and specifically thinking as my primary activity, Can I engage in another activity? That will feel risky. It will feel wrong. It will feel like I shouldn't be doing that. I'm supposed to be concentrating on my thinking. I'm supposed to be watching to make sure I'm thinking the right thing or not thinking the wrong things. And I have to check my rumination by ruminating on it. Or I could try to do this crossword puzzle that I will probably stink at because I'm in a really agitated state. But I have to start to learn that my brain is free to do whatever it wants. Like all the activity in my brain is actually okay and permissible. So when you get stuck in ruminating about ruminating or thinking about thinking, you have to fall back on the principle that, oh, I don't have to evaluate my thinking. I don't have to do that. So any thought that I have is acceptable. It doesn't matter. The process of thinking is organic. It's natural. It just happens. All human brains make thoughts all day long. So first you have to stand on that principle. Like, oh, wait a minute. My problem here is that I've developed this hyper awareness based on the idea that if I watch my thinking, evaluate it, and control it, then I'll be able to think correctly. And the answer to that is wrong. Like that's what gets us stuck. So we'd be operating here on the principle that I have to start to learn through various different approaches and techniques that I might come up with, say with a therapist working one-on-one. I'd have to show myself through experience that like I can let my brain do whatever it wants and I still turn out just fine. So I know that isn't a great answer because if you're stuck in thinking about thinking or ruminating about ruminating, naturally your propensity will be like, but what do I do? What are the steps? And the answer is you experiment with having no steps. Like you don't have to control your thoughts. You don't even have to watch them. You can hear them because you can't not hear them. You could acknowledge that you're having them, but you don't have to carefully watch them develop, evaluate them, see if they're correct, try to change them. Just acknowledge I am thinking. I am thinking is a very powerful tool we sometimes use with people who are stuck in that ruminating thing. Forget what you're ruminating about. I am thinking, and thinking is always allowed. So that's a quick answer to a complicated topic, but also know that if you are ruminating about ruminating or thinking about thinking and you feel stuck in that, it's not just you. Just start from the premise that like that doesn't serve me any purpose at all. I don't have to monitor and control and evaluate my thoughts because I don't have to try to manually operate the levers and knobs that come with thinking. Also, the principle you can rely on is I can always choose what thought to have. I can never choose what thought to not have. That's super important. We'd have to start from that like on day one. You get to choose your thoughts. You don't get to not choose your thoughts. And we also have to be careful because that can lead to compulsive thought replacement. Like, well, let me change that thought. I got to change that thought. No, I had that thought. Now, what was I doing? Instead of interacting only with the process of thinking, what else can I interact with? So hopefully that helps, at least at a very broad, general 50,000-foot view of the problem. So now we'll do three more real quick. External anxiety. This person sent in this particular message. Thanks for your work. You're welcome. I'm glad you find it helpful. I'm interested in an episode about how anxiety is or is not related to stressful external events and how we can live through tumultuous and terrifying times without being overwhelmed by anxiety. Excellent question. Thank you for sending it in. Many of us would agree. I'm recording in March of 2025 that the world just seems like a strange place. I don't care what your ideology is. Like things feel completely tumultuous right now. That's true. And human life in general can often be tumultuous. Like human lives are full of challenges and disappointments and big emotions and loss and all of those things. So yes, there are many external sources of anxiety and stress in any human life. And sometimes collectively we're under even more stress, right? There are just more sources of this. So start with the premise that it's actually quite normal to feel anxious when the world or the universe or life is pressing on you. Like anxiety could be considered a stress response. This is an indicator that I am under stress of some kind. My identity, my beliefs are being challenged. My safety is being challenged. There's things up ahead of me that I'm not sure I can meet. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this particular setback. I'm having money problems, relationship problems, whatever. There's a million external sources of anxiety that can trigger us. That's okay. The difference between the disordered anxiety person and the regular anxious person is that the regular anxious person get anxious and focuses on why they're anxious, which is, again, I'm having a problem at work, or I can't seem to find a job, or my relationship is breaking up, or I can't find a relationship, whatever it happens to be, or like the politics of the world are not aligned with me. These are the problems. I feel anxious or stressed or afraid or upset because of those things. So they can always make that connection. The disordered person is only worried about how they feel. So while there may be external sources of anxiety that trigger those feelings, it quickly shifts from like, oh my goodness, the world is a mess, to the world is a mess and it makes me feel, and I can't feel this way. That's the part we care about. So general wellness advice that has to do with self-care and stress management and taking care of yourself and feeding your soul and all of those things apply when it comes to external anxiety. But more than anything else, we care about the trap. Externally generated anxiety is normal. Sometimes it's more normal and more expected because of the challenges in your particular life or our collective lives. But there's also a trap, which is notice the time when you morph from, oh my goodness, the world is out of control right now, reasonable assertion, to, and the problem is that I feel these things. That's where we start to wander into a counterproductive place. If there's a way to address the external source of anxiety, we want to try to do that. If there's not a way to do that, or there are limited ways to do that, well, it becomes a little bit of a universal acceptance problem. These are the things that we hear through all the great philosophies and faiths in the world since we started recording history in our thoughts. Like, control the things you can and accept the things you can't is a good principle to go on here, except for a disordered anxious person. They will say, no, that doesn't count here because the problem is I need to control my internal state and I should be able to do that, right? No, not really. So if you find that the world is triggering you, a good indicator that you have disordered anxiety work to do ahead of you is I quickly become more interested in how I feel than why I feel that way. So if you notice that, it means generally would indicate that like, oh, I'm still in a situation where I fear and consider my internal state unhandleable, unacceptable, unsafe, whatever it happens to be. And I have to work on changing my relationship with my own internal fears and anxieties. I have to work on getting better at being an anxious person so that I could be a more productive anxious person when the world outside of my skin presses on me. So hopefully that helps. Another very common question in our community. This is why we say anxiety is a universal experience. Disordered anxiety is not, but anxiety is a universal experience, right? So second to last question, the penultimate question. Fear of becoming suicidal against your will. This is really important. There is a difference between being suicidal and actively planning to harm oneself or end one's existence and being afraid that you might want to do that or might have those thoughts or might become suicidal. So this question is about a very, very common state among people who have anxiety disorders, where a common theme is I'm losing control of my thoughts and sometimes my bodily responses. Like I am no longer in control of my thought. My fear just keeps coming at me for no reason. I can't figure out. I can't stop my thoughts. I can't control my thoughts. And then my body betrays me by showing all these responses to that I hate. They scare me so much and I can't stop it from happening. So I'm afraid that since I can't control my thoughts, I have found no way to control or stop thoughts. What if I start to have self-harm thoughts? And then what if I can't control that? And what if I can't control my resistance to that? And so I actually do a thing that I have no intention, no plan, and no desire to do. Right? So this person says, I was wondering if you could do an episode on how to overcome the fear of suicidal thoughts or becoming suicidal. Now, I did do an episode on this, on The Anxious Truth. Did we do it on Distorted? I don't remember. I had my friend Kim Quinlan on. We talked about it a couple of years ago. Did I have any personal experience with this? This person asks, and yes, I did. It was a huge fear for me while I was going through the worst of my anxiety disorder presentations. I used to ask people in my house to hide things from me, like scissors and knives, or my doctor would give me like a benzo prescription. I wouldn't take it because I was too stupid and stubborn. That's just me. And so I'd have a bottle of benzos still hanging around in my house that I would refuse to take, but I would ask to have those hidden because I had no intention of hurting myself, but I was afraid that I might have that thought and not be able to resist it for some unknown reason. That seemed like a very real possibility to me, but it isn't. Nobody does that. Like, thoughts are not impulses. People with anxiety disorders worry that thoughts will somehow become uncontrollable impulses, but that is simply not how thoughts work. Thoughts don't make you do things. In the context of an anxiety disorder, thoughts do not make you do things that you don't want to do. And so there's really no difference between what if I have suicidal thoughts and to become suicidal against my will, and people with OCD who have presentations like, what if I start screaming obscenities in church? Or what if I can't control myself and I make a scene when I'm in a parent-teacher meeting? I just start screaming. Or people who have panic disorder who fear that the problem will be they'll have a panic attack and it'll be so overwhelming that they'll start screaming and yelling and throw themselves on the floor begging for help and make a big scene. These are all the same question. Even though I know that, but what if I have suicidal thoughts feels like a more important question, I promise it's really not. Of course, if you do have active suicidal ideation and you are making plans to harm yourself, I gotta tell you, just not only legally, but just as a human being, please get help. But worrying that you might think about doing that, or you might have thoughts, or you're afraid of the thoughts and you don't really want to do them, but you think they're going to make you do it anyway, that's a very, very, very common, very disturbing and scary experience. But that's okay. That's a little different animal. And people who do the work that I do, we see it all the time. All the time. Every week, I see that at least 5-6 times. So very, very, very common. It's okay to be worried about becoming suicidal because you think it will somehow make you do a thing you have no intention of doing. That's a normal thought. It doesn't mean that you are going to become suicidal or harm yourself against your will. Nobody does that. It doesn't work that way. Very good question, though. And I don't mind it being asked. You'll notice that I didn't give you trigger warnings here because we don't want to do that. That would be the wrong message. Like, oh, we got to be careful about that word. In this context, and if you're listening and you want to come at me, you can feel free to come at me. And, oh, you should have had trigger warnings if the word was in the episode. The problem is the people listening to this episode are the people who are harmed the most by trigger warnings about words. So while I understand that need to try to be sensitive to people who might be consuming content on social media or in podcast apps or on YouTube, the very population that I am addressing with these videos, it's for them. And we don't help those people if we draw boundaries around particular words because they're disturbing. Like, that's a driver of this problem. So the word is okay. I promise it's safe. In fact, sometimes when people with OCD who have self-harm themes, we actually use those words intentionally as triggers to start to address those things, right? Excellent question. Very common. You're not weird if you worry about that. I used to worry about it too. So let's finish with one more topic, which is not really a specific question or a topic. It's a general thing. Many of the messages that I got, and again, if you want to send me a text message with a comment or a question, just follow the link in the podcast description. It's anonymous. I can't text you back. We don't sell your number or anything like that. Just a way to communicate with me. Many of these comments and questions that I get are about specific things. They usually look like, can you talk about the thought, ... add a thought. Can you talk about being afraid of ... Can you talk about a very specific circumstance or situation? One of the overarching rules that you have to kind of go by when you listen to podcasts like this or read my books or listen to Disordered or follow anxiety people on social media is that you have to pay attention more to the process. The content of the thought that scares you is not special. Because when you send me a text or an email or you're in my comment section and you want to say, but what about when you think, what about you're afraid of, what about the thought about, what you're basically asking is, can you give me some information? Can you do a podcast episode that will convince me that that specific thought won't actually come true or isn't real or isn't a danger to me? And that will never work because the process that creates that fear will just morph usually into some other thing. So if you've been listening for a long time or you interact with people who have been listening to this podcast or others like it for any length of time, you will notice in that sort of support community, and I use that in air quotes, people will talk all the time about their current fear. It's very common to hear like, well, 6 months ago, I was really afraid of insanity, but now for some reason, now I'm afraid of like something happening to my kids. Yeah, because it's the process that we care about, right? So we don't really want to get into a constant long run of like, okay, let me answer a question about the fear that you might scream in church. Let me answer a question about the fear that you might go insane. Let me talk about the fear of, being dizzy. Like, we don't address specific symptoms and we don't address specific thoughts. It's not in this context, one-to-many helping sort of environment where I can barely help because it's a one-to-many environment. We might get specific in psychoeducation if we worked one-on-one, but in this situation, you got to fall back on the principle that it's not the content of the thought. And if what you really want to know is, I've heard 6 different podcast episodes and watched 15 videos about the fear of insanity, but hey, Drew, can you do an episode on that too, or another episode? Because I know you've already done 1 or 2. What you're really asking is, I'm not yet convinced that this thought is safe. So it's the process by which you get convinced that your own thoughts are dangerous or threats or inappropriate or need to be controlled or stopped or banished. It's that process that we care about, right? So fall back on that. If you have a specific thought that disturbs you, or a specific fear or an outcome, an anxiety-related outcome that you think is very important and you want to hear addressed, and for some reason people like me just never seem to talk about it that much, something must be wrong. I need to hear about that. Know that if you are afraid of your own thoughts or your own emotions or the sensations that your body makes naturally when it is disturbed or triggered or afraid, then you got to fall back on these general principles that, like, wait a minute, I'm afraid of my own body and mind, and I don't have to fear that because all the sensations are permissible. They're all okay, even though they're really disturbing and scary. And every thought and every emotion is also permissible and safe, even though I really hate them. So that's why sometimes you won't hear me answer questions like, hey, what about the fear of? Sometimes when they're very, very common, widespread things. But honestly, after 10 years of podcasting and 300 and somewhat episodes, I've probably talked about your symptom broadly. You know, there's the cardiac stuff, there's the breathing stuff, there's the dizzy stuff, there's the choking stuff, there's the falling down stuff, there's the losing control stuff, there's the insanity stuff. We've all talked about that many, many times. You can go back and listen again if you want, but remember, it's not about the content of your thoughts. It's the process by which you have become afraid of your own thoughts in your body that we really care about. So that's why I don't really get into the specifics. And if you ask those type of questions and I don't answer them, I'm sorry. I know you really want me to, but this is the best answer I could give you, at least in the context of a podcast or a YouTube channel, right? So 35 minutes in, it's one of the longer episodes I've done in a long time. Luckily, there's not a lot of editing because I'm just sitting on my deck talking into a microphone while I hear my dog Copper barking because he wants to come out. So I'm going to wrap it up. We're not going to do music and all that stuff. I'm just going to thank you for listening and for your support of The Anxious Truth. I mean, amazing. I can't believe I've been doing this for 10 years at this point. It's almost exactly 10 years at this point. Actually, now it's 11 years. Oh my goodness, I'm losing track of time. And the only thing I will say is if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some podcast platform where you can rate and review and you like the podcast, positive feedback is always welcome because it helps more people find the podcast, and I can sort of help more people in the limited way that we can at a podcast or a YouTube channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, which you're not, you're listening this week and you do like it, maybe like the video, leave a question or a comment if you want. I try to circle back as often as I can to read them and try to answer the ones that I can. And yeah, maybe subscribe to the channel or hit the notification bell. I am supposed to ask you all of those things, right? Otherwise, what kind of content creator am I? Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. I hope these questions were helpful. I'll do another one of these maybe twice a year, every 6 months or so. We'll do them. Click on the text link in the podcast description if you want to send one in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave and being nice to yourselves, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're at least doing something nice for yourself by trying to learn about the nature of the struggle that is up against you right now. Give yourself credit for being brave, because even though you don't like the way it has ever felt, you are in fact tolerating and handling every anxious thought, sensation, and scary emotion you've ever had. Take that with you. I will see you again in 2 weeks for some other topic. Thanks for listening. I'm out.